After a little more time passed, back in New York City, the second tower finally succumbs and falls to the ground. It's incredible to think that people could be found underneath that. CBC's Raj Ahluwalia has been at the rescue site since early this morning. He joins us by phone now. Raj, describe the scene for us at this hour. In fact, we apologize. We've lost Raj. We'll try to get back to that later on if we can. At least we don't know how many people, how many Canadians, or at least Foreign Affairs doesn't know how many Canadians may have been involved in all of this. We do know at least one Canadian was on board one of the hijacked airplanes that rocketed into the World Trade Center. Garnet Bailey died in that terrible collision. Bailey was a native of Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. He was also well known as Ace Bailey. He was once a Stanley Cup champion with the Boston Bruins, worked as a director of pro scouting for the Los Angeles Kings, played for the Edmonton Oilers and Wayne Gretzky as well. Bailey was on a United Airlines flight 175 heading to Los Angeles from his home in Boston when the jet was taken over. Garnet Bailey was 53. Now let's go back to the scene of the World Trade Center where overnight we have been monitoring the digging, the rescue efforts underway. Raj Ahluwalia has been there since the early morning hours and joins us now by phone. Raj, describe the scene to us.
Well, right now the scene is one of a bit of confusion on one level, but I'll describe what I see in terms of the fire that's going on, which is a big concern. There's a fire that's there between two buildings that were near the World Trade Center. The two buildings are said to be pretty unstable. They're worried that buildings may come down, but the fire is consuming a lot of oxygen, and it is making it difficult for the rescuers to get any closer than they are. They're digging with heavy equipment. It's the Urban Search and Rescue Unit. They're digging with bulldozers and backhoes, and they're collecting the debris, putting them in dump trucks that are taking them out, but they can't get in closer for digging by hand and whatnot. I was just down there, and really there's a lot of people standing around waiting for that fire to die down so they can get closer. Now, the confusion I spoke about earlier is over survivors. Apparently, there's word among people here on the street here that there has been 1, 2, or more survivors. Other reports have as many as 5. Nothing has been confirmed. Nobody here wants to confirm anything. They're all waiting, they say, for senior police officials and the mayor, who's expected to come to the site here shortly. Now, that could be anywhere in the next hour or so, and that's the confusion as to how many people have survived, if any, if that is a rumor, if that is in fact true, and that has got some people sort of waiting for that to be confirmed or denied. We do know that there were people in there in Ground Zero who had communicated to people outside throughout the evening, throughout the night, and into the early morning by a cell phone. We do know that. Several people have told me that I've spoken to, that they heard the calls, they heard people talking to them. So it's not an unreasonable guess to think that there were survivors pulled out of there. The vast majority of the people, though, that are believed to be there are not believed to have survived. That is becoming clear, as that's what people say, that as the digging continues, they're finding bodies and remains of bodies.
CBC's Raj Ahluwalia joining us from New York this hour, and Raj makes a very good point. This is something we will see for weeks to come, and there will be mixed messages and mixed reports on how many people have been found, and we'll continue to follow that aspect of the story. It's a sign of just how difficult this rescue and recovery operation is, that even now only 4 of the dead on the ground have been positively identified, among them a fire chief and a chaplain of the fire department who are part of that rescue effort. Of course, there are many more injured to be helped, many more dead to be identified. The 4 hijacked jets carried 266 people. All 4 jets were completely destroyed, killing everyone on board. In New York City, hospitals are dealing with more than 1,700 people who survived yesterday's blasts. Officials say more than 300 firefighters and 80 police officers are missing. No one is even guessing at a death toll except to say thousands. 40,000 people worked in the fallen towers of the World Trade Center. As we've said, many in the U.S. intelligence community say Osama bin Laden is their prime suspect, the possible mastermind behind these terrible attacks. Today, a Pakistani newspaper says Osama bin Laden has issued a denial of responsibility. The sensational Urdu language newspaper Khabrain is quoting bin Laden as saying, quote, "The terrorist act is the action of some American group. I have nothing to do with it," unquote. The paper says it's getting bin Laden's comments through sources close to the Taliban. We have no independent confirmation of those quotes. In Afghanistan today, there are fears of a retaliation strike by the American military. Some foreign aid workers are pulling out of the Afghan capital and 5 other cities in that country. The United Nations has about 80 staff members in Afghanistan. They are all boarding a special UN flight for Pakistan. Also in Washington, the big push is on to find out who did this and why, and of course to strike back hard. We get the latest on the investigation now from the CBC's Henry Champ in our Washington bureau. Henry, the focus on the one hand, Osama bin Laden, but there's a familiar ring to this story, at least the way it's coming out in one American newspaper, suggesting a Canadian angle to all this. What can you tell us?
Well, there's no question that here there now seems to be very substantial reports that at least 2 of the 5 hijackers that took the first plane, that Flight 11 that was the first one to hit the World Trade Center, at least 2 of the 5 hijackers on that plane crossed the border from Canada into the state of Maine, flying then on to Boston. Authorities in Boston, police authorities, have discovered a rental car. In that rental car were flight training manuals and some fuel consumption guides, as well as a Quran. And the police authorities there say that they have made the link to at least 2 coming in from Canada into the state of Maine. All of this Canadian connection, of course, being watched very carefully here as the investigation continues. The President has already had his National Security Council meeting this morning. One of the attendees at that meeting, Secretary of State Colin Powell, has been talking to the media. He says for the moment, the Bush administration is not even close to picking a military target in retaliation for those attacks yesterday. He says they must build a case first, but he says that the terrorist assault will not go unpunished, and America will go after the perpetrators. No question, too, the White House took a great deal of comfort from the press conference held earlier today by Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, who said that his country would stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. There's also some concern, of course, here at the White House in the life-saving aspect of this. Every opportunity, every bit of support that the federal government can give the city of New York and indeed Arlington, Virginia, where there was attack on the Pentagon, has been done. The key element this morning at the White House will be a meeting at 11:30 between the President and congressional senior leaders. This will be a unity meeting. It will also be a planning session. Obviously, the issue of retaliation high on the list, that call coming from almost all quarters of the United States. We do expect to hear from the President at that time, sometime around 11:30, either at the beginning of that meeting or shortly after its completion.
All right, the CBC's Henry Champ joining us from Washington this hour. As Henry mentioned, in London, British Prime Minister Tony Blair is recalling Parliament, and he is offering political and military support to the United States. He says yesterday's attack was aimed at more than just the U.S.
This was an act of terrorism on a scale I don't think anyone had contemplated before, and it shows the new menace that there is, that threatens our world. And it is important, therefore, that the international community as a whole, as well as responding to this particular atrocity, considers the nature of these groups, how they are financed, how they operate, and how we defeat them.
Now, Blair wouldn't speculate on any retaliatory strikes the U.S. might take or how Britain would participate, but he did say that Great Britain is not afraid of taking action which might make Britain a target in the future for terrorist attacks. Airports remain closed across Canada, but may open to domestic and international travel later today. After the attacks on New York and Washington, about 200 planes bound for U.S. destinations were diverted to a dozen Canadian airports. Transport Canada says 44 planes touched down in Halifax yesterday, stretching the airport's capacity and stranding some 9,000 passengers. In Gander, Newfoundland, same story. Nearly 40 jets landed there, and thousands of people had to be put up for the night. St. John's, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto also took in planes and people. Vancouver received 35 overseas flights. American airspace could be open again by 12 noon Eastern Time today. While Canada's main stock market will be closed again today, officials have decided not to reopen the Toronto Stock Exchange. The financial markets in the U.S. will also stay closed today. The head of Toronto Stock Exchange says she'll decide later today if they'll be open tomorrow. The TSE 300 plunged nearly 300 points before trading was halted late yesterday morning. That is the latest news. Now back to Mark.
Ben, thanks very much. Now, I just want to mention, of course, as Ben was saying, that so many cities right now trying to deal with all these passengers who have been stranded. And Colleen, you're standing by in Halifax city itself, dealing with thousands of overnight and unexpected guests.
And some of the unexpected guests from Amsterdam wondering when exactly they might be heading out of Halifax and onto their intended destinations. But certainly tens of thousands of people who had other destinations in mind and now winding up in Canadian cities once they stopped air travel to different across the United States. So that's the question of the day. And certainly here in Sackville at the sports stadium, they are housing people here, feeding them. Just next door at the high school, there are about 450 people taking shelter there overnight, and in different arenas and exhibition halls right across this area, and in fact across the country as well. A look at our weather right now across the country, though. We've got Iqaluit showing a few showers, a daytime high of about 6 or so. Yellowknife is sunny and 14, cloudy conditions on the way with afternoon sunny periods in Whitehorse and 12. BC sunny periods 19 to 20 degrees, in Kamloops is clear and 24. Regina, chance of afternoon showers and 17 degrees. There was a frost warning overnight into Saskatoon, where it'll be about 15. In Edmonton, Calgary, fairly sunny in Edmonton, but still the chillier temperatures for Alberta, just 10 to 15 degrees in the big cities of Calgary and Edmonton. Winnipeg is sunny, 16 degrees or so. Brandon cloudy and 16. Thompson's got some afternoon showers and 11 degrees. And then for Thunder Bay, we're looking at a mixed bag with some sun cloud, then a chance of showers later in the day, and 17. Rain into Timmins today. For southern Ontario, Toronto's looking at sunshine, but clouding over late in the day, and a chance of some showers in 26 and thunderstorms in 21. Into Ottawa under fairly cloudy conditions. Montreal, increasing cloud in the morning, chance of showers late in the evening and 21. Quebec City is sunshine and 20 degrees. For the Maritime provinces, we've got a clear day, temperatures anywhere from 18 to 24 degrees. Halifax is going to be sunny and 22. St. John's is sunshine and 24 degrees, and Gander 24 degrees as well. I know a lot of people holding up in Gander and St. John's after their planes were diverted there. And as you heard during the news, Ace Bailey, director of pro scouting for the Los Angeles Kings, was one of the passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 175. Wayne Gretzky, who once played with Ace Bailey when he was with the Edmonton Oilers, and was also a scout there as well for Los Angeles Kings. He said, "We are all deeply saddened by the loss of Ace Bailey." He said his heart goes out to his wife Kathy and son Todd, and he says he was a winner as a person, and we will all miss him greatly. They're also reviewing now security procedures that they have already put in place for the Salt Lake City Olympic Games in 5 months' time, and they are certainly adding to the $200 million budget that they have already allotted to that. Mark.
Colleen, thanks very much. Well, many questions being shouted in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks. The two loudest, of course, who did it? And how did the terrorists manage to hijack those planes? Well, to help answer the issue of the hijacking, I'm joined from Los Angeles by Bob Francis, who's a former vice chair of America's National Transportation Safety Board. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, as you know, there hasn't been a hijacking in the United States, an air hijacking, in about 10 years, and yesterday we see 4. How did this happen?
Well, I think that, number one, it was clearly a very sophisticated, well-financed and planned attack. I think that one of the things that's happened in civil aviation security over those past 10 years that you referenced is that we've been much more concerned about bombing. We haven't been concerned about hijacking, and we certainly have not been concerned about suicidal hijackings. So I think that obviously there's going to have to be a lot of thought given to how we refocus on this new and very difficult threat.
Well, what do you do, though, I guess, in plain terms here? Because the reports coming from the planes, the hijacked planes themselves, from passengers who were on board with cell phones, said that in several of the instances of the hijackings, that these hijackers had what appear to be like X-Acto knives, plastic knives with a small razor blade inside them. They were using those to hijack the planes. How do you stop people from slipping something as innocuous as that into their luggage and on board?
I don't think that weapons like that are really the issue. Determined people who are trained in physical violence are going to be able, without any kind of a weapon, to take over this kind of an airplane. Pilots in commercial jetliners are not trained to deal with that, and certainly these people are going to be able to do it. The real issue here, to me, is more, and certainly there are going to have to be modifications in civil aviation security, but intelligence is really what is the most important thing. And I think that as a national effort which cuts across civil aviation, the CIA, the Foreign Service, the FBI, that's where we're going to have an enormous focus.
Clearly, on that big picture, I don't quarrel with you there, but as everybody knows who's flown, you go through the procedure, the safety procedure, going through x-raying luggage, of having these people there who are supposed to be guaranteeing our security. I mean, are there cracks in that system that are, obvious cracks that need to be addressed on the short term?
Well, I think we're going to have to find out exactly how this was done. I think one of the things that you have to be very careful about, and we're just talking about 24 hours or so ago now, is making determinations as to exactly what has to be modified or done. Now, clearly today, when they reopen the system, if they do, there are going to be things that are done that are much more restrictive in terms of checking luggage and identification of people and security people being around the airports. But over the long term, I don't think that any of us should be sitting here right now and either assessing blame in terms of exactly what happened or deciding in 24 hours exactly what measures are going to have to be taken to deal with what is a uniquely and very difficult new threat.
Now, you mentioned about the intelligence and how that has to be stepped up, organizations like the CIA and FBI, but as someone who has sat in your position, how does that intelligence get from the CIA to the person who is checking bags at Logan Airport or any other airport in North America? That's done through
Liaison between the CIA and the FAA's Civil Aviation Security Division. And that's a pretty sophisticated and already well-developed system. And then the FAA goes and levies requirements and gives the warnings to the carriers and to the airports. But the issue is you've got to have the good intelligence to begin with. And I think that we probably could learn a little bit from the Europeans, who tend to put more emphasis on the intelligence gathering, intelligence side of the equation, as opposed to the physical security. I spent a number of years in Europe with the FAA, including during the Pan Am 103 bombing, and there are some things they do differently that we should at least be looking at.
But Bob, you know that there's going to be a reaction in the United States to say that we're going to need immediate a step up of security in the airports. I mean, although you say perhaps in the first 24 hours it's not the best time to be reevaluating that, but you know there's going to be pressure on people like the National Transportation Safety Board or the Federal Aviation Authority in the United States to do something to reassure Americans. So should they expect that there will be changes in the short term?
Well, I think there will be, and Secretary Mineta announced some of those changes yesterday, and I think that's totally appropriate. But in terms of the overall how the system is going to work and sort of basic changes, some of those things may become permanent. Others may prove in the fullness of time to not be the best things to do, and there will be other things that we'll want to do which will accomplish the same thing in a better way.
Okay, Bob. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Bob Francis in Los Angeles. Now, let's head to Ottawa, where the CBC's Susan Bonner is standing by. Susan, I understand the Prime Minister has been speaking with the U.S. President. What can you tell us about that?
That's right, Mark. I just got off the phone with the officials in the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister spoke with U.S. President George W. Bush just a few moments ago, and the President expressing his country's, saying that his country was grateful for Canadian assistance, both with Canada offering to do anything it can to help the victims, and also with the Canadian assistance on security issues. The Prime Minister was given a briefing by the President about everything that's going on in terms of security and the general situation facing the U.S. and the world on the terrorism front, and the President making it very clear to the Prime Minister that the U.S. is resolved to deal with that issue. So we'll have to stand by and wait and see exactly what that means in terms of retaliation or whatever from the United States.
Susan, I don't know if you heard the comments earlier from the British Prime Minister Tony Blair saying that the British are committed right now to doing whatever it takes to help the Americans, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Americans in tracking down the culprits here. What's the message that's coming from Ottawa and whatever role our country can play in this process?
Very much the same kind of message, Mark. The Prime Minister made it very clear yesterday that Canada will do whatever it can to assist the United States, its friend, its ally, that it would help and has helped on questions of security, that it's offering whatever help is needed in terms of aid to victims and displaced Americans and Canadians affected by this whole situation. And the Prime Minister working very closely today with his key ministers and with his key ambassadors and consulates across the world to make sure that Canada is ready to help in any way that the U.S. asks for.
Okay, Susan, thanks so much. And as we know, so many Canadians are helping out, whether it's giving blood to the shelters that have been set up at many of the cities right now where American passengers, flight passengers, have been stranded after their planes were forced to land at Canadian airports. Of course, back down at ground zero, if we can say, many of the survivors of yesterday's terrorist attacks are still in shock, along with the family and friends of the thousands missing in the rubble of the World Trade Center. The Red Cross is helping people deal with the trauma of this tragedy, and Rita Hostler is with the Red Cross in New York. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, set the scene for us in New York this morning in terms of the Red Cross involvement. What are you doing? What's going on there today?
Okay, well, you know, the American Red Cross is certainly responding for a second day now. Last night there were shelters open in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, and on Staten Island to provide residence for people who did not have family or friends to stay with, and they were evacuated from the lower part of Manhattan. And there were several dozen people that did stay in those shelters, and we anticipate that population will probably grow.
Rita, you know, the Red Cross wants to be prepared for any sort of emergency, but clearly no one in their wildest imaginations could be expected or prepared for something like this. How are you coping with the demand right now?
Well, we are coping with demand very well because the public has generously come out to support the efforts of the American Red Cross. Trained disaster volunteers are ensuring that they are available to help staff the shelters. We have mental health volunteers that are going out in roving teams with our emergency response vehicles and talking to emergency workers and talking to residents of Lower Manhattan and people that were evacuated yesterday from their office buildings. So, you know, we're doing what we can to provide comfort and care, and certainly encouraging people to reach out to their own support systems as well.
And how are these people coping, the people that you're dealing with in these makeshift shelters that have been set up?
As you can imagine, I think that for many people it's shock and disbelief, and today it's going to start settling in a little bit more about what exactly the trauma impact that they have been through. And it's not going to be something that people are going to be able to process today. It's going to take months, weeks, years that people are going to take to recover from this because it was so traumatic and so sudden.
And of course, when I think Red Cross, I think blood. And I know watching this morning a news briefing by some doctors from the St. Vincent's Hospital in New York, still appealing for blood. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yesterday there are 36 blood centers across the United States, and all blood centers did put a call for people to keep their donation appointments, and also for other people who are healthy and who fit the criteria of weighing over 110 pounds to go to a blood donor or to call the American Red Cross or another blood site and schedule a blood appointment. Because again, it's not the blood supply that's being diminished today, but we're concerned about what the blood supply will look like a week or 2 weeks from now. We need to make sure that we have a consistent, steady number of donors.
You've made the appeal. What's the response been like so far?
Overwhelming, as very well similar to the volunteers offering their supportive help. People have willingly been going to blood donation centers to donate blood and schedule appointments. Myself, as I was coming to the studio this morning, I was approached by 4 different people asking about the nearest location so that they could donate blood. And it's really something that's top of people's mind, and it's something that they can do, and it's very easy to do.
Indeed, and I know just obviously here in Canada that Canadian Blood Services as well has launched the same appeal for people to donate blood. The response has been overwhelming in Canada to build up our supply, and so far blood has not been requested in the United States yet, but there is blood here that is being stored in that event. Rita, I know you're preparing for a very busy and trying day. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, firefighters were among the first rescue workers on the scene of yesterday's terrorist attacks in the United States, and many of them were trapped when the World Trade Center towers collapsed. Others continue the dangerous search for survivors. And for more on their rescue work, I'm joined from Washington by Harold Scheitberger of the International Association of Firefighters. Good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
You're, well, miles away at least from ground zero, if we can call it that, in Manhattan. But what can you tell us about the scene? Your members, the firefighters, what are they coping with this morning there?
Well, what they're coping with is we start with one of the most tragic days in this country's history. But I can tell you it is absolutely the most devastating day in our two nations' history for the fire service. We have what is going to amount to catastrophic losses of our members who are the first responders on the scenes in New York and in Washington, D.C. During these events and when this country has come under attack. I'd like
we're actually just watching, I'm sorry, a live shot right now, which is coming out of Manhattan, where we can see that the fires are still burning. Just how difficult work, because so many people are right now saying, look, we want to get a rescue effort underway for people who are trapped there, but how do you do that when the fires are still burning?
Well, right now they are up against terrible odds. They are dealing with an unstable work site. They are dealing with an untold mountain of rubble. Our members, I am so proud of our members. This country should be so proud of our domestic warriors who were in those buildings yesterday. They were performing at the highest level of service. They were performing their search and rescue at the time of these two disastrous collapses. Now they're faced with trying to work through just virtually mountains of rubble, steel, concrete, doing their job as they're trained to do to try to begin extricating victims and to continue to look for those casualties that hopefully we will find a few more civilians and some of our own that are still alive, trapped under that rubble and some voids.
Yes, because as you well know, Harold, that some of the people who were first on the scenes were the firefighters. And right now, at least out in New York, what we're being told is there are 300 firefighters who are missing. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, I know the numbers have been adjusting all night, and we're not going to know the final toll till the full accountability is completed. Certainly, we're looking at somewhere between 200 and 300 firefighters. This exceeds by tenfold the largest number of firefighters ever lost at a single incident in the history of our North American fire services, the largest being at the turn of the century at the Chicago Stockyards with 24. We are just going to continue to look for our members as well as do our work on behalf of the citizens, but it's clear that the toll is going to be just catastrophic on our people.
Indeed. Harold Scheitberger, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And for a complete wrap of what happened yesterday and last night and this morning, let's check in now with Ben Chin at NewsWorld's National News Center to get the latest headlines. Morning, Ben.
Good morning once again, Mark. Some good news this hour from the wreckage in New York. Reports say 7 survivors have been found. They include 6 firefighters and 1 police officer. Rescuers apparently heard them beneath the debris and dug all night to get them out. All of them are said to be badly burned, but alive. It's been 24 hours since the first plane struck, setting the North Tower on fire. Then about 20 minutes later, another hijacked plane punches through the South Tower. By 9:40 a.m., terror strikes in the nation's capital as well. This time, another Boeing jetliner crashes into the Pentagon, causing several stories to collapse. By 9:50 a.m., the structure of the first tower back in New York gives way, and the whole building falls to the ground in a cloud of smoke and dust. 10 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 93 plunges to the ground near Pittsburgh. Little more time passes, and back in New York City, the second tower finally succumbs. Well, the CBC's Raj Ahluwalia has been right there at the rescue site since early this morning, and he joins us once again by phone. Raj, describe the scene for us.
Well, there's a new fire that has come up in the last half hour or so. I'm standing here looking at the scene that's been there, that I've seen all night and early this morning. And then, like I said, about an hour ago, there was smoke coming from the top of the World Financial Center building. It's a distinctive building, not quite as tall as the World Trade Centers were, but there's smoke coming out of that. Nobody seems to know here on the ground that I've been able to speak to what caused that. This was not one of the buildings that had been smoldering or burning throughout the night and into the morning. There were two other buildings that were burning all night that were said to be unsafe, and the firefighters and the rescue people were worried about those buildings because they weren't stable. They were worried about them. Excuse me, there's a lot of soot in the air. Worried about them not being able to stand up, and those were the fires there that were preventing the rescuers from doing a lot more of the hand digging. However, has come up suddenly. No one seems to know why. We're waiting for, the other thing is that we're waiting for Mayor Rudolph Giuliani to arrive. Senior police and fire officials. Perhaps that's been delayed a little as they try to deal with this, because there's been a rush.
All right, the CBC's Raj Ahluwalia joining us from that rescue scene, and we will check back with him when we can reestablish that line, also to see what may have caused that fire that he was talking about. It is a sign of just how difficult this rescue and recovery operation is, that even now only 4 of the dead on the ground have been identified, and among them a fire chief and a fire department chaplain who were part of the rescue effort. Of course, there are many more injured to be helped, many more dead to be identified. The 4 hijacked jets carried 266 people. All 4 jets were completely destroyed, killing everyone on board. In New York City, hospitals are dealing with more than 1,700 people now who survived yesterday's blasts. Officials say more than 300 firefighters and 80 police officers are missing in action. No one is even guessing at a death toll, except to say thousands. 40,000 people worked in the fallen towers of the World Trade Center. Well, as we've said, many in the U.S. intelligence community say Osama bin Laden is their prime suspect, the possible mastermind behind these terrible attacks. But today, a Pakistani newspaper says Osama bin Laden has issued a denial of responsibility. The Urdu language, a rather sensational newspaper, Kabrain, is quoting bin Laden as saying, quote, "The terrorist act is the action of some American group. I have nothing to do with it," unquote. The paper says it's getting bin Laden's comments through sources close to the Taliban. We have no independent confirmation of those quotes. In Afghanistan today, there are fears of a retaliatory strike by the American military. Some foreign aid workers are pulling out of the Afghan capital and 5 other cities. The United Nations has about 80 staff members in Afghanistan. They're boarding a special UN flight for Pakistan. In London, British Prime Minister Tony Blair is recalling Parliament. Blair is offering political support to the United States. He says yesterday's attack was aimed at more than just the U.S.
An act of terrorism on a scale I don't think anyone had contemplated before, and it shows the new menace that there is, that threatens our world. And it is important, therefore, that the international community as a whole, as well as responding to this particular atrocity, considers the nature of these groups, how they are financed, how they operate, and how we defeat them.
Blair says he'll support whatever actions the United States might take, even if that support makes Great Britain a target for future terrorist attacks. Well, Canada's main stock market will be closed again today. Officials have decided not to reopen the Toronto Stock Exchange. The financial markets in the U.S. will also stay closed today. The head of Toronto Stock Exchange says she'll decide later today if they'll be open tomorrow. The TSE 300 plunged nearly 300 points before trading was halted late yesterday morning. Those are some of the stories we're following for you at Newsworld's National News Center. Now it's back to you, Mark, in the atrium.
Ben, thanks so much. Just, of course, a programming note for people who may have been tuning into the main network of the CBC, looking, of course, for children's programming. Needless to say, it has been preempted this morning due to our coverage of this story on the main network of the CBC. We will return at some point in the day to regular programming on the main network of the CBC. Of course, Newsworld will continue to follow this story throughout the day. Following this story in Halifax, our own Colleen Jones. Good morning, Colleen.
Morning, Mark. Of course, Sackville, the area where thousands of passengers have had to come, their planes diverted from other destinations, most notably America. Often, this is where they curl, they swim, and they play a little bit of hockey. Today, it's closed to the people who are guests because they have guests who have bedded down for the night. As a matter of fact, we just heard that one of the stranded passengers just found out that family members were killed in yesterday's tragedy, and he's quite distraught, obviously, at this time. A lot of the passengers wondering when will they ever get out, too, because the whole trickle-down effect of worldwide, the flights that couldn't get into the United States yesterday is going to be felt for the next couple of days to come. And certainly here in Sackville, they have made plans to keep people for 2 to 3 days at the most. They're hoping that everybody will be able to get on their way a lot sooner than that, but the reality might be much different. Look at our weather across the country. Sunshine in St. John's and 24 degrees. Clear into tomorrow as well, and periods of rain on Friday. I know that there also had thousands of stranded passengers in St. John's as well, and the Toronto Maple Leafs canceled their training camp, at least for the short term. They were supposed to be in St. John's yesterday. Nova Scotia, 22 degrees, 20 tomorrow as well, and a chance of showers coming for Friday. Charlottetown is 19 and sunny. Afternoon cloud and a chance of showers tomorrow, and isolated showers and 20 on Friday. Fredericton is sunshine and 22, periods of rain tomorrow, and cloudy with scattered showers on Friday. Quebec City is sunshine, rain beginning in the afternoon and 20, and rain beginning by midday tomorrow and 18 degrees on Thursday. Montreal increasing cloud, chance of showers and 21, chance of showers tomorrow as well, and cloudy showers on Friday and 17. Ottawa has thunderstorms and 21, sunshine tomorrow and again on Friday. Sunny skies in Toronto, late day showers developing and 26. Sunshine tomorrow and 18 degrees, and sunshine on the way for Friday. Winnipeg is sunny for the next 3 days. Regina, afternoon showers and 17, cloudy tomorrow and 18 degrees on Friday. Sunny for today, cloud cover tomorrow in Edmonton. Temperatures starting to creep back up there, but only 10 in Calgary. Showers tomorrow as well. Vancouver is sunny for the next 3 days, and so is Victoria, right into Kamloops, where they'll have some glorious skies and temperatures around 24 to 25 degrees. Whitehorse is 12 degrees, sunshine 14 degrees, and a few showers on the way for Iqaluit. And of course, so many tragedies. Yesterday, one of them, Ace Bailey, was on United Airlines Flight 175. He was the director of pro scouting for the Los Angeles Kings. He also played in the NHL for many years, has several Stanley Cup rings. And Wayne Gretzky passed on his condolences to the family, and he said Ace may not have been the greatest hockey player to play in the NHL, but he taught many players how to win championships, and more importantly, he was a winner as a person, and we will all miss him greatly. And that's he was 53 years old in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. That's what's up from here for now. Mark.
Colleen, thanks so much. Of course, this story is playing out on so many fronts this morning around the world. Ground zero, of course, though, is New York, where Lori Graham is standing across the harbor from the ruins of the World Trade Center. Good morning, Lori. We heard in a report from Raj Ahluwalia there seems to be a new fire burning in the area, and if I look over your shoulder, that's exactly what I see. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Mark, just to give you a sense, as we look across, I'll just step back for a little bit here. It is was earlier the rooftop of the World Financial Building, and a little while ago there was quite a lot of smoke coming out from the rooftop, and then just down below that, where the Twin Towers were located, the debris is smoldering as well. So it appears that there are still some pretty intense hot spots there in Manhattan, right on the site from Ground Zero, which of course is making all of the relief effort and the rescue effort very, very difficult for so many of the workers. But there is, some information coming out from that area. It's very, very slow, though, the rescue effort. We're being told that moving the debris is very, very difficult, that many of the rescue workers are concerned that there could be bodies there, so they want to be very cautious. We do know at this point a confirmed report from Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who spoke to some national radio organizations, did some interviews. He said that there are 259 deaths, and they're all uniform deaths. That means that they are firefighters and police officers. We know that 202 of those 259 were firefighters. The rest were police officers. And that's very difficult because these were the people on the scene at the very early stages trying to go in and help people when the Twin Towers collapsed on them. There is some good news, though, Mark. We have a confirmed number that there may be as many as 9 survivors, 6 of those firefighters and 3 police officers. And we know that there was some concern among the firefighters because an entire crew was lost, and we're told that those 6 firefighters are from that crew. They got word from them, buried beneath the rubble. The rescue workers went in and got them. So there's some good news over there at the scene, but as you know, it's very slow going, and still so many unaccounted for.
Okay, Laurie, it's going to be a very, very long day for you down there. We'll be checking back in with you shortly. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Well, thousands of people work in the World Trade Center, and thousands more pass through it every day, either as tourists or train passengers on the way to or from the local station. Now, one of the people who had arrived there by train just as the first plane crashed into the complex was John Axisa, and he joins me this morning on the phone. Good morning to you, John.
Good morning.
Well, take us back to yesterday, which is now almost 24 hours to the minute to what happened yesterday, what you saw.
Well, rather lengthy, actually. I was on a train. The subway system arrives in the, I guess, the lower level of the World Trade Center, and I guess the train was pulling in the station just as the plane hit. And at that time, of course, we didn't know anything in the subway system, except there were officials trying to keep people and evacuate the lower level, which is a shopping mall. My intent was, as long as I was going to be evacuated, I should be evacuated towards my final destination. I actually went around them because it was still disorganized and into the buildings. And I was amazed at how quickly they emptied the building, and some officer asked me to leave. As I was leaving, I was one of the last people to leave because of my intent to continue on. And I was coming up a staircase, which is about, I guess, about 100 yards away from the building. And the people ahead of me, as they were entering the street level, were all gasping and saying, "Oh, my God." And, I couldn't understand why. And, of course, once I got there and I saw that gaping hole in the tower, I was just struck. It was just, and you can smell the fuel or something. It smelled like an electrical fire. And I was just numbed by it all. And I stood there and watched. And then, of course, the next thing we noticed, actually, the crowd I was with, we all saw it together, was people began to jump from the building. And I couldn't comprehend this. I couldn't conceive it. I didn't want to believe it was really happening.
You were seeing people jumping from one of the Twin Towers?
People were jumping from the building. I don't know if they were coming from immediately above the flames. I think so. From the windows that were shattered. The assumption was that there was so much heat and smoke, but it was clearly people. I saw there was a gentleman in a red shirt. He just came down, and a woman in a suit. It was horrible. The crowd reaction was just, it was beyond description. And I turned away after seeing about 3 of them. I didn't want to see anymore. And suddenly there was a loud blast. And I turned back and I saw a fireball erupting from the other tower. I never heard the plane. I still didn't believe at this point it was an airplane. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was a bomb. And I was convinced the tower was going to come down immediately. And the whole crowd, we all ran. And I guess at that point, I ran about a block away before I stopped to turn, and I just saw now both towers with these large holes in them and flames billowing out. And like a confetti of paper and metal and just showering down the streets. As I was running, I recall checking my shirt twice. I thought that actually my shirt had caught fire. The heat from the fireball that had come down on us was just so intense. I actually reached back and checked my shirt and my hair twice. And the noise from the explosion itself was just like it emanated from inside my head. It was just such a shocking sound.
John, I can imagine as you've looked at the destruction now, you must be so thankful to be alive, as we've seen so many people who did not make it out of that scene as you did yesterday. And I'd like to thank you so much for joining us this morning, John Exisa.
Okay.
Now, let's check in with Harry for the latest business news.
Thanks, Mark. Obviously unimaginable scenes of horror in New York over the last couple of days. And as rescue workers pour over the remains of the smoldering wasteland that was the World Trade Center, there is also an effort going on underway around the world. You can see the remains of the World Trade Center there. Concerns about the World Financial Center nearby as well this morning. The scramble also now on to shore up international financial institutions in the international financial system. The European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan announcing just a little while ago that they're pumping $80 billion into global money markets, hoping to stabilize exchange rates, hoping further to avoid a looming recession that many analysts say now may be all but inevitable. There is also the expectation that a coordinated move on interest rates will occur in coming days, if not in coming hours, as the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and the U.S. Federal Reserve are in constant contact. Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, and the world's most important central banker, on his way back from Switzerland, where he was meeting with the group of 10 finance ministers. He is on his way back to the United States now. It has been made clear that those three central banks especially have been in constant contact since the events yesterday. They hope to restore confidence among business and, equally importantly, among consumers around the world. This event, this tragedy, comes at a point when many had thought that perhaps the U.S. economy was beginning to turn around, and there is considerable concern that those plans have been thrown awry. Additional trouble in Europe this morning, as well as the markets there try to conduct business under some effort of normalcy, but being bothered and troubled by bomb threats throughout Europe and in London. We had I understand the Frankfurt Bourse was evacuated at one point. The Bank of America offices in London also evacuated. Troublesome events, obviously, at a critical time when all who have any ability to are trying to calm the markets. Gold rocketed yesterday as people sought a safe haven. That has backed off a little bit. Oil prices also surged, but for the most part, it looks as though efforts to maintain the impact globally on the financial markets are having some effect. Markets in Asia were sharply lower this morning. However, markets in Europe, while lower at the moment, have stabilized. And we are now also told that the TSE will be closed for the remainder of today. We'll find out later on today if it will also be closed tomorrow. And, of course, New York markets also closed, Mark.
Harry, thanks very much. You know, it was now 24 hours almost to the minute that at least we here at CBC Morning thought we were covering a fire in one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. That was sort of the first report that had come across to us. Of course, as events unfolded, we realized we were witnessing history in an unprecedented terrorist attack here in North America. Now, there's a live shot, as we can see, 24 hours later. The skyline of New York changed forever, and the smoke still billowing in the sky as firefighters continue to fight the fire that burns in the area where the Twin Towers once stood. They continue to search for bodies, continue to search for survivors. As I mentioned 24 hours ago, well, the CBC's Brian Stewart has compiled a recap of yesterday's horrific sequence of events.
Early morning rush hour. Thousands of New Yorkers battle morning traffic to make it to their jobs within the twin 110-story north and south towers of the World Trade Center. Though a terrorist target 8 years ago, at the Trade Center, 50,000 are expected in its offices. Today, there's no special alert or sense of menace. To the north, at Boston Airport, just 1 minute before 8, American Airlines Flight 11 takes off headed for Los Angeles. It's a Boeing 767 carrying 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots. All seems normal as it crosses Newark and climbs to 10,000 meters over the Adirondacks. But suddenly, air traffic controllers see it veer off course and start heading for New York. For the next 30 minutes, alarm controllers watch an apparently hijacked plane streaking towards Manhattan. Then within minutes, they see a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175 with 56 aboard, also veering off course, aiming for Manhattan. At 8:45, all hell breaks loose above New York. The first plane, Flight 11, crash dives straight into the North Tower of the Trade Center, causing catastrophic loss of life. 18 minutes later, at 9:03, a stunned city sees the second plane swoop unerringly into the side of the South Tower, a scene which stuns the world. Even as this is happening, there's more on the way. In Washington's Dulles Airport, Flight 77, a Boeing 757, takes off for Los Angeles. Suddenly veers off direction and at 9:38 crashes at the west wing of the Pentagon, the very command center of America's military. Minute by minute, horrors mount. 10 a.m., the unthinkable. In New York, the entire South Tower of the Trade Center collapses, like a giant avalanche of concrete and steel, burying so many wounded and rescue workers. 10:10 in the morning, United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 with 45 on board, traveling from Newark to San Francisco, plows into a field disintegrating in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. There are reports of an explosion just before the crash. Then at 10:29, the drumbeat of calamity reaches its peak. Incredibly, the North Tower of the Trade Center also collapses. An event so stunning, so threatening, that much of Manhattan is evacuated. In just 2.5 hours from the first takeoff in Boston to the tower collapse, America and the world have changed in ways still uncountable and incalculable.
CBC's Brian Stewart, who was just giving us a recap of that deadly sequence of events yesterday. As I say, it was just about 24 hours to the minute when this deadly sequence was unleashed. What we can tell you this morning, of course, so many people still searching for answers. One of the things many people want to know is the victims and the survivors. So little is known at this stage for obvious reasons. 2 twin towers collapsing there is going to take days, if not weeks, to find that out. The New York Mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, has confirmed 259 deaths. Now, those include 202 firefighters. A glimmer of good news coming out of there this morning, as there have been confirmed 9 survivors, which in and of itself is incredible given the fact that these towers have collapsed and the fires continue to burn there. Now, latest twist in all of this as we try to find out who is responsible is that it appears there could be a Canadian connection to all of this. With more on that, let's head out to Halifax, to Sackville, Nova Scotia, where Rob Gordon is standing by. Good morning, Rob. I know there's been a report in today's Boston Herald. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that the Boston Herald is reporting that 2 of the terrorists may have entered the United States through Portland, Maine. Now, one of the ways they could have gotten to Portland, Maine is through Canada. In the south of Nova Scotia, there's a town called Yarmouth, and there's a very popular ferry run that goes from Yarmouth to Portland, Maine. It's about an 11-hour run. Now, it's suspected, and this is all unconfirmed at this point either by Canadian or American officials, that the terrorists boarded the ferry in Yarmouth, went to Portland. Now, Portland is about an hour and a half north of Boston, so it's just a very short drive to get to Logan Airport. Mark?
Have we had any comment from any Canadian authorities about this report from the Boston Herald?
No, not at this point. No one has spoken to this particular angle that the Boston Herald has uncovered. I can tell you that there are American customs officials at Yarmouth and then also at the other end in Portland, and that it is a guarded area. It's an open border, of course, but you do have to go through checkpoints. But again, it's an 11-hour run on that ferry. It's called the Scotia Prince, and it's extremely popular and very busy at this time of year. A lot of tourists coming back and forth. A lot of Nova Scotians go to Portland from Yarmouth on that ferry for shopping trips. Mark?
Rob, thanks so much. And one thing that Rob Gordon, of course, is highlighting is the fact that we have so many unanswered questions right now, and so many questions at that. Of course, is how could this have happened and who is responsible? To help us on that front, at least, we're checking now with Paul Bremer. He's the former chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism. He joins me this morning from Washington. Good morning.
Morning.
On the front, at least on the question of who's behind this, what can you tell us about that?
Well, I think there are only 2 or 3 organizations in the world with the capability of mounting such an operation. Bin Laden is certainly one of them. Some of the more radical Palestinian groups might be able to operate, do such an operation, maybe in conjunction with the state or with Bin Laden. And certainly Iraq and Iran have the capability of doing such an operation. So it's a short list.
You know, there has been, for what it's worth at least, in a Pakistani paper this morning, a report reportedly quoting Osama bin Laden, reportedly saying that he has nothing to do with it. What do you think about reports like these?
I dismiss them entirely.
Where do we go from now? Give us a sense of what the United States, the intelligence community, is doing right now to try to track down the culprits.
There are really 2 paths being pursued right now. First, the intelligence community is going back through all the intelligence that's come in over the last months and year to see if they missed something, to see if some pieces of the puzzle now fit together. Was there a snippet of a conversation here that now, in this context, makes sense? Meanwhile, the law enforcement people are tracking back, as you've just reported, on the hijackings, because I think that's where we will find the most immediate leads as to where this hijacking came from, where the hijackers came from, and who they were. And I have absolute confidence that we will know which group or state was responsible for this, and we're going to know pretty soon.
Paul, some people say that this incident highlights a failure of U.S. intelligence. What's your read?
That's absolutely correct. Anytime there's a successful terrorist attack, by definition, it's a failure of intelligence because we didn't know about it ahead and prevent it. The National Commission on Terrorism that I chaired focused on some of the weaknesses in our intelligence gathering on terrorism last year in our report to the President. Unfortunately, our recommendations have not yet been accepted, and I think it's certainly going to be the case that there's going to be a big spotlight shown on the intelligence community now.
We can only imagine now. I don't know your report and I don't know your recommendations, but given what we know now, do you see things then that you were recommending, problems that could have perhaps helped prevent what happened yesterday?
Well, the main problem in intelligence gathering here is, first, it is the most difficult intelligence in the world to gather. Let's not be kidding ourselves. Because in order to get good intelligence, you have to have a human being in the intelligence group reporting to you. And that means you've got to basically put a terrorist on your payroll, and that's not a very pleasant thing to do. But that's something that the CIA has gotten away from in the last 5 or 6 years, and our commission recommended a much more aggressive approach.
Along with the question of who, of course, is the question why. Now, what can you tell us about that? Why these sites? Why this attack?
Well, of course, you can't separate the why from the who, because the who depends on the motive, and the motive is the why. Bin Laden, we know, has declared war on the United States. He did so 4 or 5 years ago, and he's done it repeatedly since. He makes no bones about it. He has called on all good Muslims to kill American citizens wherever they are, including civilians. And so he has a motive. Saddam Hussein, of course, we are still effectively at war with Saddam Hussein, and he has a motive. And some of the more radical Palestinian groups in the Middle East would presumably have a motive because of our support for Israel. So there are a variety of motives. The targets do suggest Osama bin Laden because the World Trade Center and the Pentagon are sort of the symbols, respectively, of our capitalist and our military might.
Now, we hear a lot about the complexities of this attack yesterday, the sequence of events, but give me a sense of, from your perspective, just how difficult would this be to pull off, and how much planning would have to go into something like this?
This was an extremely well-planned attack, which took months, if not years, to plan. There have to have been at least several dozen people involved, probably more. We know from what we've heard already that there were 3 or 4 hijackers on each of 4 planes, so already you're involving maybe 20 people in this event. It may be that these people traveled, as we've heard, across the borders. They may have had false passports, which means that they had to have accomplices in other countries giving them passports. It's an extremely complicated plot, and the fact that it involved apparently four airline pilots as well means that you cannot exclude that some state was involved, because bin Laden certainly doesn't have the capability himself of training pilots for modern commercial aircraft in the deserts of Afghanistan.
Now, what are you hearing today, at least, in terms of what happens next in this search for the culprits?
Well, I think all indications are that the finger is pointing more and more at bin Laden. If the FBI leads that we've heard about this morning are true, and they're starting to get some sense of who the culprits were, the actual perpetrators, I would think it will not be too many more days, and certainly not many weeks, before we know who did it. And then the question will pose itself for